So this week, Torah reading has two what we call pillars of Judaism, pillars of the Jewish people. We have the Shema in the Torah reading tomorrow, which is, I guess, they call it the declaration of faith. Monotheism, which is Abraham introduces to the world and becomes a fundamental idea of a great deal of civilization, and introduces the idea of a moral and ethical code that comes from the one God and comes from the God and not from the king or from the government. It comes from a source beyond us, and we're all obligated by that moral and ethical code. And it has the Ten Commandments. So one is a declaration of faith, and the other one is, this is what you got to do. This is how it goes if you want to have a good society, if you want to have a fair society. And the Shema has that first paragraph, one of the first things we all learned in Hebrew school, V'ahavta, and you shall love the Lord your God. And it always bothered me. Why? Because how do you command somebody to love? Right? You can't command people to love. Right? We even say, you fall in love. Right? Remember in Fiddler on the Roof, and he wants to know, do you love me? He says, well, my mother told me, even though I didn't know you, that I would learn to love you. Right? So you can learn to love somebody. You can't command it. Right? I can't command you to love chocolate. Right? Is there anybody here who doesn't? There are a few who don't. I've met a few, right? You can't command somebody to love it. Nobody can command me to love the New York Jets, okay? It just can't happen. So there are things you can't, yeah, he could try, right? So it always bothers, what do you mean commanded to love God? So if you don't love God, if you can't get that, it's an emotion. You can't force an emotion, right? So if you don't actually love God, you're going to beat yourself up. I mean, I don't follow this basic command that we sing twice a day. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, you shall love the Lord your God. So I wondered, could it really mean that they're trying to command us to love, right? And then I realized it can't be that. You know why? In the Ten Commandments, right in the same parsha, what does the commandments tell us to do for our parents? Respect, exactly. Respect, honor. Why doesn't it say love your parents? Because I can be commanded to respect and honor. And most people will come to love their parents, but you can't command it. But respect and honor and care for them, that you can command, because that's an action. So the Torah didn't even want to try and command us to one of the most natural loves in the world. The only more natural love is a parent for a child. But a child for a parent is so natural, but the Torah said you can't command it. Because if you can't do it, you can't do it. But you better honor them and respect them and care for them. So I was wondering, what does the Torah really mean? You shall love the Lord your God. So the Torah knew it was a difficult idea, so it actually spelled it out for us. To love God is not something secret or mystical. It's not an emotion. It is not, as the Torah says, something, it's not in the heavens, it's not difficult. So what is it? It means to walk in God's ways, to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his ordinances. In other words, to obey God, to go in a path that God would want us to go in. And we are to do that with all our heart, with all our might, and with all our souls. It's not to love God with all our might, it's to follow his commandments with all our might, with all our soul. When we sit in our homes, when we walk by the way, when we lie down, when we rise up. Then the Torah adds another meaning to the idea of loving God. It says, V'shinantam levanecha. You shall teach this commandment to your children. If we don't pass on the covenant with God, the laws, the traditions, this thing we call Judaism, or we call it Torah, if we don't pass it to the next generation, then the Torah says, then you don't really love God. Because God needs to be in perpetuity, needs from generation to generation. So that's what to love God means, to follow in his footsteps in terms of his teachings and commandments. Now, there's another definition of what it means to love God, from the great prophet Isaiah, from where this song came from, that the cantor Nanny sang for us tonight. Love of God, Isaiah says, means, and if you listen carefully on Yom Kippur, you'll recognize it, loosen the fetters of wickedness, let the oppressed go free, break every yoke, break the yoke of prejudice and exploitation, loosen the fetters of wickedness in the home and in the street. If you love God, deal your bread to the hungry, bring the poor that are cast out into homes. If you love God, when you see the naked, cover them. If you love God, says Isaiah, do not hide yourself from your own flesh and blood. So love of God for Isaiah is expressed in how we treat God's creation, how we treat our fellow human beings, how we treat each other. We just finished commemorating the destruction of the first two temples, the first two commonwealths in Jerusalem. And why was the second temple destroyed, said the rabbis? We talked about it last week. Baseless hatred of one Jew for another. Not caring for the other, not respecting the other, not taking care of the other's needs. That's why the temple was destroyed. It doesn't say because they weren't keeping Shabbos. It doesn't say because they didn't love God. It doesn't say because they didn't make the sacrifices properly. It says because you didn't treat each other properly. And that's why the temple was destroyed. In fact, they were meticulous in their observance of the ritual. The sacrifices were perfect. The holidays were observed. Shabbat was carefully maintained. But they didn't take care of each other, respect each other, treat each other with honesty. So none of that meant anything. God said, you don't love me if you don't treat your fellow human beings with respect and dignity. High holidays are coming, right? So we got that famous al-chet list for the sin we have committed, right? There's a list so long that if we spent our whole life trying to do those sins, we wouldn't have enough time. It's a really massive list, right? Interesting what it deals with. There's not anything about not loving God. There's a great deal in that list of I have sinned, about disrespecting our fellow human beings, which for our tradition is the same thing as disrespecting God. It's kind of like the relationship between parents and children. If you harm someone's child, you bully them, you disrespect them. When you disrespect someone's son or daughter, the parent takes it very personally, as if they've been disrespected or harmed. Because the child is created in the image of the parent, as an extension of the parent. We are in the image of God, all of us. So when someone disrespects another person, mistreats them, God is insulted. You hurt one of my creations, one of my children. Remember that when supposedly religious Jews negate the legitimacy of other Jews, or when a Jew who isn't taken by ritual ridicules another Jew just because they do find meaning and comfort in ritual, neither are really loving God. If we want to really fulfill this commandment, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'yodecha, then we need to love and respect our fellow Jews, our fellow human beings, even when we don't agree with them. It's a very hard lesson to learn. That's probably why the rabbi said we should recite it twice a day, in the morning and the evening, because it's really hard to do. It's like a mantra. Work on this, work on this. It's one that our community continues to struggle with. It's one that the community in Israel struggles with. One which regretfully in many ways our religious leaders are not helping us to learn. But the key to Israel's strength, the key to any country's strength, is to respect each and every citizen, each and every fellow Jew, In that way, we fulfill the commandment that we will read in tomorrow's Torah, that we recite twice a day. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And you shall teach those lessons to your children. And in that way, we will fulfill the commandment of V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. Shabbat Shalom.